It took just 5 minutes for something to happen that simply shouldn't be possible in any normal voting system. More than 7,000 votes suddenly appeared, erasing a massive 30,000 vote lead as if it had never existed in the first place. There was no gradual build, no visible wave of fans organizing, no spike in engagement that could explain it. The numbers didn't climb, they jumped. And anyone watching it unfold in real time could feel it immediately. Something about this wasn't right. The pace, the timing, the sheer volume, it all moved with a kind of precision that didn't look human, it looked mechanical. And what made it even more unsettling was the fact that everything else stayed completely consistent. While the vote count was flipping at an impossible speed, the rest of the internet told a completely different story. The comment sections were still overwhelmingly in favor of one player. The conversations, the reactions, the visible fan support, it all pointed clearly in one direction. But the poll? It was suddenly racing the other way. That kind of disconnect doesn't just happen randomly. When numbers stop matching behavior, people start asking questions, and in this case, those questions came fast. Within minutes, fans stopped being passive viewers and started turning into investigators. Screenshots were taken, timestamps were logged. People began tracking the vote changes in real time, building a record of exactly when things started to shift and how quickly it all spiraled. This wasn't just outrage or speculation anymore, it was documentation, a digital trail forming in real time, capturing a moment where the outcome seemed to be slipping away from what everyone could clearly see happening everywhere else. For a brief moment, it felt like the result had already been decided somewhere beyond the court, like the performance itself didn't matter as much as whatever was happening behind the scenes. And that's what made the situation so hard to ignore, because it challenged the idea that what people were watching, what they were reacting to, and what they believed actually mattered. But then, just when it seemed like the narrative had been completely flipped, everything changed again. Because when the official decision was finally announced, it didn't follow the poll at all. The result went to the player whose performance had already told the real story, Caitlin Clark. And in that moment, what started as a strange voting anomaly turned into something much bigger. Not just a debate about who deserved to win, but a deeper question about what people had just witnessed and how something so visible could feel so disconnected from reality. What happened in San Juan, Puerto Rico was supposed to be simple. The 2026 qualifying tournament for the FIBA Women's Basketball World Cup was expected to follow a familiar script. Team USA arrives, dominates, and leaves without much resistance. And on the surface, that's exactly what happened. 5 games, 5 wins, no losses. From a results standpoint, it was clean, efficient, and completely in line with what everyone expected from one of the most stacked rosters in international basketball. But this tournament carried a different kind of weight, especially because of one name, Caitlin Clark. This wasn't just another appearance on an international stage, it was her return. After a 2025 season that had been disrupted by injuries and surrounded by constant doubt, this tournament became something much bigger than qualification. It was the first real opportunity to reset the narrative. For months, questions had been building. Was her impact fading? Had others caught up? Was the hype starting to cool off? None of those questions came from what she did on the court, but they were loud enough to shape the conversation anyway. So when she stepped onto the floor in San Juan, every possession felt like it carried extra meaning. This wasn't just about winning games, it was about proving something. And from the very beginning, Team USA didn't just win, they controlled everything. The pace, the spacing, the decision-making, it all ran with a level of precision that made every game feel one-sided. Opponents weren't just losing, they were being out-executed in every phase. And right at the center of that control was Clark, not forcing the spotlight, but directing it. The offense moved through her, the tempo responded to her. Every sequence felt calculated, every pass intentional, every shot part of a larger rhythm that the rest of the team flowed into. It didn't look like someone trying to prove a point, it looked like someone who already had. By the time the final buzzer sounded on that 5th game, the record was perfect, but more importantly, the story on the court was clear. Team USA hadn't just advanced, they had done it with a level of control that left very little room for debate about who was driving that success. And that's exactly why what happened next felt so out of place, because while everything on the court pointed in one direction, the conversation off the court was about to go somewhere completely different. To understand why this tournament mattered as much as it did, you have to look at what led up to it. Just a year earlier, Caitlin Clark was coming off one of the most impactful rookie seasons the WNBA had ever seen, not just in terms of highlights or scoring, but in measurable impact across the entire league. Television ratings surged when she played, arenas sold out at a pace the league hadn't experienced before, jerseys flew off shelves. Every metric, on the court and off it, shifted when she was involved. It wasn't just success, it was influence, the kind that changes expectations overnight. And that's exactly what happened heading into 2025. The pressure didn't just rise, it exploded. Year 2 was supposed to confirm everything. Bigger performances, more consistency, complete control of the league. That was the expectation. But instead of building on that momentum, the season took a completely different turn. Injuries stepped in early and never really let go. Game after game passed without her on the floor, and before long, the season that was supposed to define her growth became one filled with uncertainty. And in that absence, the narrative shifted fast. Critics didn't wait. Questions started turning into assumptions. People began suggesting that maybe the peak had already passed, that the league had adjusted, that others were ready to take over the spotlight. None of those claims were built on what she was actually doing in games. But when you're not playing, perception fills the gap, and it filled it quickly. So by the time she returned for the Puerto Rico tournament, this wasn't just about stepping back onto the court. It was about stepping back into a conversation that had moved on without her. Every possession carried context. Every performance was being measured not just against the opponent, but against months of doubt that had been building in the background. And then, right from the first game, that doubt started collapsing. There was no hesitation, no slow adjustment period, no signs of rust. She came out with control, precision, and confidence that immediately reset the tone. The ball moved faster, the offense looked sharper, and the impact was instant. It didn't feel like a player easing her way back. It felt like someone picking up exactly where they left off, without missing a step. And that's when it became clear. This wasn't just a return, it was a reminder. Because what she was showing in Puerto Rico wasn't about proving she still belonged. It was about showing that nothing had actually changed, except the narrative around her. By the time Team USA closed out its 5th straight win, the conversation around the tournament's most valuable player wasn't supposed to be complicated. It had already been decided on the court, possession by possession, game by game. Caitlin Clark didn't just have good numbers, she had control over everything that produced those numbers. Her stat line told one story: 11.6 points per game, over 52% shooting from the field, 40% from 3. Efficient, clean, consistent. But the real separation came from what those numbers created around her. She averaged 6.4 assists per game, the highest of any player in the entire tournament, and every one of those assists represented something bigger than just a pass. It was tempo control. It was decision-making under pressure. It was the ability to dictate how every game unfolded. And when you zoom out, the full picture becomes even harder to argue against. A plus 104 cumulative plus-minus across 5 games. That means every single minute she was on the floor, Team USA didn't just compete, they dominated. Not occasionally, not in stretches, consistently. Add in her team-leading efficiency rating, and what you're looking at isn't just production, it's impact at a level that touches every part of the game. Scoring, spacing, playmaking, rhythm, everything ran through her, and everything worked. That doesn't mean there wasn't competition. Rhyne Howard put together an exceptional tournament, averaging over 20 points per game with remarkable consistency. Night after night, she delivered, building a case that, in most tournaments, would have been enough to take the spotlight. And then there was Paige Bueckers, whose presence alone brought attention and energy, showing flashes of the elite talent that has made her one of the most anticipated names entering the next level. But this is where the gap becomes important. There's a difference between playing well and controlling everything. Howard's scoring was elite, Bueckers' presence was impactful, but Clark was operating on a different layer entirely, the layer where the game itself starts to bend around how you play. She wasn't just contributing to wins, she was shaping them. And that's why by the end of the tournament, the real debate, if there even was one, lived between Clark's all-around control and Howard's scoring dominance. It was a legitimate basketball discussion, grounded in performance, backed by numbers that made sense when you watched the games, which is exactly what makes what happened next so difficult to explain. Because somehow the conversation shifted away from everything that actually happened on the court and into something that didn't match it at all. That shift started the moment FIBA introduced what was supposed to be a harmless add-on, a fan MVP poll designed to boost engagement around the tournament. On the surface, it made sense. Let fans participate, spark debate, give people another reason to stay connected after the games ended. The candidate list looked exactly like you'd expect, featuring names like Caitlin Clark, Paige Bueckers, Rhyne Howard, and several other standout performers. It felt like a simple extension of the tournament conversation. But underneath that surface, the structure of the poll told a completely different story. There were no meaningful safeguards in place, no vote limits per user, no verification system, no rate limiting to slow down abnormal activity, no bot detection, nothing that would separate genuine fan engagement from automated input. It was essentially an open system, one where anyone or anything could submit votes without restriction. And while there was a small disclaimer placed at the bottom stating that the poll wasn't an official decision, that didn't change how visible or influential it could become once it started spreading. At first, everything behaved exactly the way you would expect. The numbers moved steadily, Caitlin Clark built a clear lead, and that lead matched what people were seeing everywhere else. Social media comments, fan discussions, reactions across platforms, it all aligned. The growth was gradual, consistent, and most importantly, traceable. You could see where the support was coming from, and it made sense. But the design of the system left a door wide open, and eventually something walked through it. Because when a system has no barriers, no verification, and no control over how inputs are generated, it stops being a reflection of people and starts becoming vulnerable to anything that can interact with it. At that point, the poll wasn't measuring opinion anymore, it was measuring access. And that's when reality inside the poll began to separate from reality everywhere else. And then, without warning, the entire pattern collapsed. What had been a steady, predictable flow of votes suddenly turned into something that didn't follow any recognizable human behavior. In a span of just 5 minutes, more than 7,000 votes were added almost entirely in one direction. The gap that had taken hours to build disappeared in moments. A 30,000 vote lead gone. Not chipped away, not gradually reduced, erased. And then, just as quickly, the numbers flipped. Paige Bueckers' total didn't just increase, it accelerated in a way that looked more like a system executing a command than a fan base reacting in real time. The graph didn't curve upward naturally, it shot up. A vertical climb so sharp that it broke the rhythm everything had followed up to that point. And while that was happening, nothing else changed. The comment sections didn't suddenly flood with new voices supporting her. There wasn't a wave of posts, shares, or reactions that would normally accompany that kind of surge. The visible activity stayed the same, but the numbers didn't. At the same time, Caitlin Clark's support remained overwhelming everywhere you could actually see people interacting. Comments continued pouring in at the same ratio as before, still heavily in her favor, still consistent with the lead she had built earlier, which created a situation that didn't make sense from any angle. One side was dominating every visible channel of engagement, while the other was somehow generating thousands of votes in near silence.
And that's when the moment stopped being just surprising and started feeling impossible to explain. Because real fan momentum leaves a trail. It shows up in comments, in shares, in conversations happening all at once across multiple platforms. It doesn't operate quietly, and it definitely doesn't appear out of nowhere in perfectly timed bursts. But this surge had none of those signs. No buildup, no noise, just raw numbers moving at a speed and precision that didn't match how people behave. Within minutes, what started as a normal fan poll had turned into something else entirely. A data pattern that looked less like participation and more like execution. And for everyone watching it unfold, the question wasn't just who was winning anymore, it was how this was even happening in the first place. What happened next is what turned this from a strange moment into a documented case that people couldn't ignore. Instead of just reacting or arguing in comment sections, fans started doing something very different. They began collecting evidence. Screenshots were taken at precise intervals, vote counts were recorded down to the minute. People started comparing numbers across different timestamps, building a timeline of exactly when the surge began and how fast it escalated. This wasn't scattered outrage anymore, it was organized observation. Thousands of people watching the same thing, quietly piecing together a record in real time.
And the more that record grew, the clearer the pattern became. The vote spikes weren't random. They followed tight, unnatural intervals, clusters of activity that appeared too consistent, too evenly spaced, too fast to be explained by human interaction. Fans began lining up screenshots side by side, showing jumps of thousands of votes within minutes, sometimes seconds apart. When you looked at it frame by frame, it didn't resemble people clicking a button, it resembled something executing a process, the kind of pattern you expect from automation, not participation. What made this even more compelling was how quickly the community understood what they were looking at. You didn't need to be a data scientist to see the problem. The evidence was visual. Numbers that should move gradually were leaping in blocks. Growth that should be messy and unpredictable was appearing clean and controlled. And as more people added their screenshots, the timeline became harder and harder to dispute. Independent users across different platforms were capturing the same behavior at the same moments. That kind of consistency doesn't come from coincidence. It comes from something happening system-wide. At that point, the conversation shifted again. It wasn't just about who benefited from the surge, it was about how it could even happen at all. People began explaining in simple terms what this kind of activity usually points to. Automated scripts, repeated submissions, systems capable of generating large volumes of input in a very short time. Nothing overly complex, nothing out of reach, just tools that take advantage of open systems with no restrictions. And that detail brought everything back to the design of the poll itself. Because when there are no limits, no verification, no friction, there's nothing stopping that kind of behavior from taking over completely. But even with those explanations, what kept this moment alive was the documentation. The fact that it wasn't just one or two clips, not a single screenshot taken out of context, but a chain of evidence built by hundreds, then thousands of users. Every new post added another piece to the timeline. Every comparison made the pattern clearer. And because it was happening in real time, there was no way to rewrite it after the fact. The sequence was already out there, recorded from multiple angles, preserved across platforms. And that's when this stopped being just a questionable poll result. It became something people had watched unfold, captured step by step, and now couldn't unsee. Once you step back and look at the scale of what was being claimed by the vote surge, the entire situation becomes even harder to make sense of. Because this wasn't just a small swing or a niche fan push, it was a massive, rapid shift involving tens of thousands of votes appearing in an incredibly short window. And for that to be real, it would require a level of coordinated human activity that leaves a visible footprint everywhere. That's how real fan movements work. They don't just click silently, they show up across platforms, flooding comment sections, sharing posts, reacting, debating, making their presence impossible to miss. But that's not what happened here. On one side, you had Caitlin Clark, whose fan base has already been proven to operate at historic scale. When she entered the WNBA, viewership numbers didn't just increase, they shattered previous records.
Games featuring her drew millions of viewers. Ticket demand surged so aggressively that platforms struggled to keep up. Jersey sales spiked almost instantly. These aren't vague claims or exaggerations. They're documented outcomes that show exactly how large and active her audience really is. When that kind of fan base moves, you see it everywhere, all at once. And that's exactly what was visible during the poll, just not in the vote count. Because while Clark's supporters were dominating comment sections, showing up consistently and engaging in every visible way, the numbers inside the poll were telling a completely different story. A story where a silent wave of votes, tens of thousands strong, appeared with almost no trace outside the poll itself. No surge in conversation, no matching spike in engagement, no evidence of a fan base mobilizing at that scale in real time. Then you look at the other side of it. Paige Bueckers is undeniably a star. Her talent is real, her following is growing, and her transition into the professional level is one of the most anticipated storylines in basketball. But even with that, her fan base, while passionate, is not known to operate at the same overwhelming scale. There's no record of massive ticket system crashes tied to demand, no history of generating millions of simultaneous viewers at the level Clark has. So when the poll suddenly suggests that this same fan base produced a rapid, coordinated burst of tens of thousands of votes in near silence, it raises a serious question.
Where was the rest of the activity? Because scale doesn't just show up in one place. It spreads, it echoes, it leaves patterns that match across multiple channels. And here, that connection was missing entirely. The numbers inside the poll were behaving as if something massive was happening, while everything outside the poll showed no sign of it at all. That disconnect is what makes this so difficult to explain honestly. Because for the surge to be real, it would require believing that thousands of people acted at the exact same time, in perfect alignment, without speaking, without reacting, without leaving any visible trace beyond a single click. And that's not how real audiences behave, not at this size, not at this speed. Which leaves only one conclusion that more and more people started leaning toward, not as a confirmed fact, but as a growing suspicion. That what the poll was showing wasn't actually a reflection of people at all. And in the end, when everything was stripped down to what actually mattered, the decision came from the one place that couldn't be influenced by a sudden spike in numbers, the official evaluation process. On March 17, 2026, FIBA announced that Caitlin Clark had been named the official MVP of the qualifying tournament in San Juan. Not the fan vote result, not the numbers that had been circulating online, but the outcome based on what happened on the court over 5 complete games. And when you look at that decision, it lines up exactly with everything the tournament showed from start to finish. Her 6.4 assists per game led the entire field. Her shooting efficiency remained elite across all 5 matchups. Her overall impact, measured through efficiency rating and plus-minus, consistently placed her at the center of Team USA's dominance. This wasn't a subjective call made in isolation. It was a conclusion supported by performance, by consistency, and by the way the games themselves unfolded. What makes this moment so important isn't just who received the award, it's the contrast it created. On one side, you had a fan poll that had spiraled into something widely questioned, producing numbers that many people watching in real time couldn't reconcile with reality. On the other side, you had a structured evaluation process that arrived at a result matching what players, analysts, and viewers had actually seen on the court. 2 completely different outcomes, built on 2 completely different systems. And notably, there was no major follow-up addressing the irregularities people had documented during the voting process, no detailed audit publicly shared, no clear explanation breaking down what caused the sudden surge. The disclaimer attached to the poll remained the only official framing around it, quietly separating that system from the official decision. But that silence didn't erase what had already been seen, it just left it unanswered. Because even though the final result corrected the outcome, the moment itself didn't disappear.
The screenshots, the timelines, the patterns, they were already out there, captured and shared across platforms in real time. What the official announcement did was restore the result to what the game had already shown, but what it couldn't do was remove the questions that had been raised along the way. And that's what makes this ending feel different, because the award went to the player who earned it, but the path it took to get there revealed something far more complicated than just who deserved MVP. When you put everything together, what happened in Puerto Rico stops being just a strange moment tied to a fan poll and starts looking like something much bigger. Because in the end, the result itself wasn't changed. Caitlin Clark was officially named MVP by FIBA, exactly as her performance suggested she should be. The games told that story clearly. The numbers supported it. Anyone watching closely already knew where it was heading. So on the surface, you could say everything worked out the way it was supposed to. But that's not really the point.
What this situation exposed is the growing gap between what actually happens on the court and what can be created online in a matter of minutes. A system designed to reflect fan opinion was turned into something that many people felt didn't reflect people at all. And whether that was the result of coordinated behavior, automation, or something else entirely, the effect was the same. It created a version of reality that didn't match what everyone could see with their own eyes. And that gap is where things start to get complicated. Because this isn't just about one poll or one tournament. Moments like this add to a larger pattern that fans have been noticing more and more. Situations where performance, statistics, and outcomes don't always align with the narratives that take over online. And each time something like this happens, it becomes a little harder for people to ignore that disconnect, not as a confirmed conclusion, but as a question that keeps coming back. At the same time, this also set the stage for what comes next. Because the story doesn't end in Puerto Rico. It moves forward into a new season where everything will be tested again, but this time in real time on a much bigger stage. Paige Bueckers is stepping into the league with momentum and attention, while Clark returns fully healthy with something to prove, not to the game, but to the conversations around it. And when those two paths finally cross on the court, there won't be any polls, no vote counts, no outside noise shaping the result, just the game. And that's really what this all comes back to. Because no matter how fast numbers move online, no matter how convincing something might look on a screen, the one thing that still decides everything is what happens when the ball goes up.